tell us how things look today as compared to how they looked before the Kerch Bridge terror attack.
I mean, before the terror attack against the Kerch Bridge, we were looking at a slow motion transition on the part of Russia. A decision had been made to partially mobilize to bring 300,000 reservists onto active duty. A decision had been made to, and it's a dramatic decision, to incorporate four formerly Ukrainian territories into the Russian Federation. And while this was, I think, groundbreaking in terms of the geopolitics of it, it hadn't fundamentally changed the situation on the ground. The Russian military was still overextended. The Ukrainians were still enjoying the momentum of their September offensive. And then the attack on the bridge came. And we've just seen a dramatic transition. The Russians have basically taken the brakes off. They've appointed a new commander, ominously nicknamed General Armageddon. And he has been given, he's the single commander of the entire theater. He makes all the decisions. He can use the weapons. Anything short of nuclear weapons can be used to achieve the objectives. And within 24 hours of taking command, as you mentioned, the skies, if not blackened by cruise missiles, there was a definite presence felt by the Ukrainians as scores of critical strategic infrastructure targets were hit, not just one day, but the next day and the next day. I don't know how long this campaign will go. If it truly is the initiation of a strategic air campaign designed to destroy the critical infrastructure of Ukraine in preparation for a large-scale Russian ground offensive, mirroring, by the way, the approach taken by the United States in Desert Storm back in 1991, then the Ukrainians are in for a very, very long and difficult period of their history, one which will see the integrity of their nation degraded. It's tragic for the Ukrainian people. It's tragic for Europe. It's tragic for everybody. But it's something that they brought upon themselves together with NATO, the United States, the European Union. And we see it. We see the impact of this. We see the panic in the voice of Zelensky as he calls for preemptive nuclear strikes, as he begs for assistance, pleads for more money, more weapons. We see NATO assembling an emergency meeting in Brussels where they're talking about sending hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars more of air defense systems to create from whole cloth an integrated air defense network capable of defending Ukraine from the Russian onslaught. I mean, things look good on paper when they're planned in a vacuum. You can sit there in Brussels and say, I'm going to put a radar here, put some missiles here, and we'll move it all around and shuffle. It's another thing to try to do that in the midst of an ongoing air campaign where Russia is going to be hunting you down and seeking to destroy you before these systems are put in. But all it shows is that NATO, rather than doing the right thing and going to Ukraine and saying, hey, we might want to look for a diplomatic off-ramp that allows you to preserve as much of your country as possible and as many lives as possible, NATO's doubling down on their bad bet, only working to lengthen this tragic conflict, which in the end will result in the same outcome. Russia wins. But this time, Russia's victory will come with a far greater blood debt. Tens of thousands of more Ukrainians will die. Thousands of Russians will die. Mothers will no longer have their husbands, will no longer have their sons, wives. This is tragic for everybody. And it's something that seems to escape everybody in NATO, in Kiev, in Washington, D.C. It seems as if humanity no longer has any value, that it's all about geopolitics. It's all about trying to outmaneuver Russia in some grand, global scheme. But war isn't about that. War is about people killing people, and that's what's going on right now.
Stoltenberg took the mask off, didn't he, yesterday? He said a victory for the Russian side in this conflict would be a defeat for NATO. and that cannot be allowed to happen. This was a declaration of NATO's involvement in the war up front and public, wasn't it?
100%. I mean, it's also curious again that he chose this moment to take the mask off, as you so eloquently said. I thought, I mean, listening to Jan, that Russia was losing. I thought that the Russians were being defeated. I thought that Russia was on the run. I thought Ukraine had turned the tables, that this was decisive. And suddenly, no, a Russian victory is a defeat for NATO, and we cannot let it happen. Stoltenberg's scared. Stoltenberg knows what's going on. Stoltenberg understands what happened. And that's why he did the next dumbest thing, which is to announce that NATO will continue a nuclear exercise next week. It's an annual exercise of NATO's nuclear capabilities, but this is not the right time. At a time when the president of Ukraine is calling for a preemptive NATO nuclear strike against Russia, why would NATO exercise the very means that would be used to carry out a preemptive nuclear strike against Russia? The wise thing to do, something that a man of maturity, a man of intelligence, a man of humanity would do, would be to cancel or postpone this exercise so as not to unnecessarily elevate tensions at a time when nuclear weapons are being discussed. But that's not what he did. He doubled down on his notion that Russia cannot be allowed to win. Therefore, to help preclude a Russian victory, NATO is going to do what? Test its nuclear arsenal? This is insanity of the highest order.
Yes, I mean, they'll be making dramas about that in years to come, if we are permitted any years to come. Because, of course, upon that announcement that you referred to, Russia immediately began exercises amongst its civilian population, distributing leaflets, putting out films, and organizing the population to prepare for the possibility of weapons of mass destruction coming in and being used to attack them. They are giving out leaflets. For example, I saw one earlier today, which, when translated, was a leaflet telling you what to do about the possibility of radiation poisoning. It's like going back, I don't know if you recall those days, Scott, to the 1980s, the placement of cruise and Pershing missiles in Europe, the fear amongst the Eastern Bloc, the Warsaw Pact countries, that nuclear war was going to be preemptively launched by NATO. Now, it never was going to be, and of course, it did not happen. But you still see great movies and dramas today about the tension that led to. And I could hardly believe my ears when they announced they're going to have a nuclear drill at this moment where Joe Biden is talking about the possibility of nuclear Armageddon.
George, this is super. I mean, first of all, I do remember the 1980s. I was in the Marine Corps at the time of those deployments, and I was actually one of the inspectors that went into the Soviet Union. I was the first inspector into the Soviet Union as part of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which was signed between the United States and the Soviet Union to get rid of those weapons, to get rid of the Pershings, the cruise missiles, the Soviet SS-20s, etc. And so this is why I take double umbrage at Stoltenberg's comments. Hey, Stoltenberg, people like me sacrificed a whole bunch to get rid of those weapons, to create a situation where your relatives, your people, your citizens wouldn't have to live in fear under a nuclear umbrella that could collapse on them at any moment. We took that away so you could breathe easy, live easy. Now you're bringing it right back. I mean, this is literally lunacy of the highest order. And I'm not just, worried about it. I'm angered. I mean, we spent a lot of time and effort and money making the world a safer place to live. And now thanks to people like Jan Stoltenberg, Donald Trump for getting out of the INF Treaty, Joe Biden, and others, we're just going right back to square one. And we're making the same mistake. Able Archer 83 was a NATO nuclear exercise that almost brought NATO and Russia to nuclear conflict because the Russians didn't realize until the last minute that this was just an exercise. They thought it was the real deal. And that's one of the things that led Ronald Reagan to sign the INF Treaty, this realization that we almost went to nuclear war over a mistake. Well, my goodness, read the history books, Stoltenberg. You're making the same mistakes. You can't always count on dodging the bullet.
Now, Scott, when you look back on it, you might say you didn't have to be Einstein to foresee it. The attack by a terror bomb on the Kerch Bridge was a big mistake by Ukraine.
100%. And, but so was the assassination of Daria Dugina. So were so many other things that have been done here. The Ukrainians are in danger of not just having the Russians recognize the reality of this regime, but the world to wake up to the fact that if you carry out an act of terrorism, which of course the attack on the Kerch Bridge was, then those who perpetrate it are terrorists. And if a state sponsors this, they become state sponsors of terrorism. The Ukrainian government has literally defined itself as a state sponsor of terrorism, and its intelligence services are now a terrorist organization. This is an uncomfortable reality for the people that support them. But it's one thing to have Russia call them out. Another thing to have done something that actually pushed Russia in a direction that they did not want to go. Russia could have taken the gloves off at any time over the past 8 months, any time. They didn't. Russia has not been seeking this escalation. Russia has been seeking a diplomatic solution to this crisis. But now, because of this attack, diplomacy is off the table. The gloves are off, and the Ukrainians are going to pay, as they said in Games of Thrones, the iron price. I don't think this ends well for Ukraine. In fact, I don't think this ends with Ukraine being anywhere near the nation state we currently see. I think it's going to be smaller, more fractured, and it certainly won't be governed by the Nazi-embracing regime of Volodymyr Zelensky.
What did you make of the Belarusian front, the military movements that took place there over the last 48 hours? The Belarus border is exceedingly close to Kiev. You can motor there very quickly. I have myself done so in years gone by. It is a potentially lethal threat to the Ukrainians if Belarus enters the war, isn't it?
It is, but Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, has made it clear that he doesn't have any intention to enter the war in terms of fulfilling Russia's objectives under the special military operation. He has been consistent in saying that Belarus has one task and one task only, and that is to stop NATO from stabbing Russia in the back while Russia carries out the Ukraine operation. But Lukashenko has also said that they will not allow Poland to move into Western Ukraine, that they will not allow Poland to take control of that territory. And what's been happening over the course of the summer is that Poland has been, in the United States, we call it sheep dipping, but basically changing the nature of Polish troops, transforming them into Ukrainian troops and sending them to Ukraine to fight the Russians. We know this. Why? Because there are hundreds of Polish corpses littering the battlefields. The Russians know exactly what's going on. Poland is seeking to double down on this, and they're preparing more troops to be sheep dipped. And the Belarusians are becoming very concerned that Poland may be making a play for Western Ukraine, taking advantage of the upcoming defeat of Ukraine. And Lukashenko said, I will not tolerate Poland extending its borders, down my country, in effect, trying to surround me. And so I believe the Poles are preparing to intervene, to block any effort of the Poles to make a move on Western Ukraine, and this would be a decisive entry into the conflict. But it goes beyond this because Poland won't do this without certain assurances from Russia, and among those assurances is that Russia will extend its nuclear umbrella over Belarus, so that if the Baltic states or Poland were to engage in some sort of military adventurism in response to a Belarusian move into Western Ukraine, that Russia's nuclear arsenal would come into play. So this is a very, very dangerous situation. And again, it could be avoided if Poland just kept its nose out of what's going on in Ukraine. But Poland has been making noises for some time now that it intends to incorporate Western Ukraine back into Poland, keeping in mind that in 1939 it was taken away, 1945 Stalin once again took it away and gave it to others, and the Poles feel that historically this territory belongs to them.
I'm glad you made that point, though we don't have too much time to dilate upon it. But we're being asked potentially to die in a nuclear winter over whether unpronounceable place names are to be in Ukraine or in Russia, when they've actually been in a multiple number of countries already in the course of the last 100 years. Maybe that's a discussion for another time. Finally, Scott, and I'm grateful for your time always, President Macron said today, again, I could scarcely believe my eyes, that President Putin has to get back to the table to negotiate. A table at which, number one, the Ukrainians have said explicitly they will never sit at, and moreover, a table that was burned by the EU, including Macron, and NATO in general, 8 months ago. They are the ones that say that no negotiated settlement is possible, that only the defeat of Russia can bring about the end of this war. Is this a sign that Macron is weakening, or is he just talking out of his backside?
Well, it's both, actually. I mean, there's no consistency in Macron or anybody in the European community right now when they speak about Russia. So almost everything they say comes out of their proverbial backsides. But it's also a recognition on the part of France, and a growing recognition on the part of almost everybody in Europe, that Ukraine has lost this conflict. To coin or to bring a historical analogy from the American Civil War, the September offensive in Kharkov was their high water mark, similar to that of the Confederate Army on the third day of the Battle of Gettysburg when Pickett's charge was undertaken. They'll never be as good as they were at that point in time. They burned their reserves. They have nothing left. Russia is mobilizing faster than Ukraine can rebuild. Russia has a strategic air campaign that's degrading Ukraine's infrastructure, and it's going to be a long, grueling, tragic decline to unconditional defeat. And Macron recognizes this, so he is now starting to panic and say Russia must come to the table. Well, why would you invite Russia to the table again if Russia is losing? I thought Russia lost. I thought the Russian army was defeated. I thought. No, it turns out that Russia's winning. Macron is panicked. Zelensky's panicked. NATO's panicked. Europe's panicked. Biden's panicked. There's nothing they can do to stop this outcome. And so they're hoping that Putin's going to win the war for them by surrendering on the moment of his greatest victory? I think not.
Scott Ritter, as always, a pleasure to talk with you and an education.